There was a story we did a few days ago about OP whose brother was trying to ruin her life. His name was Henry. Well, guys, here's part 2 to that story, and let me just tell you, it gets so intense. This is one of the craziest stories I've ever read. If you want the link for the first part of the story, it'll be in the description below. Let's get right to it. Everyone thought I was mad when I told them that he was back and he was responsible for my husband's accident. My parents called the police where he was held and confirmed that he never left. They told me I was probably just stressed out and I had to chill out. Not even the proof of the letter he sent me was enough to convince them of my sanity. My mom got very angry and upset when I mentioned him, and I could see that she did not want to be reminded of what happened so many years before. We had since moved away from that town because his exposure made things difficult for us. People bullied me and expressed their anger at me because, well, he was not there for them to punish. Many felt that he had been given a light punishment and deserved worse than what he got, which is help for his mental illness. Either way, it became difficult for us to stay there because people refused to forget. After all, a child had lost his life because of my brother, so we left and buried the memories. I never went for therapy. I refused because I could not relive that horror that he put me through. I refused to let him have any part of my life, which was why I did not tell anyone. Not even my husband about it. At first, my husband was sure that it was just a case of a hit and run, but I was not going to let him dismiss it as just that, because, well, I was shaken. I could not go anywhere without feeling like I was being followed and would get attacked at any moment. A dark cloud seemed to follow me around, but every time I looked back, there was nothing. Anyways, I told my husband everything about my past, opening up about it and reopened all the wounds that I thought had already healed. I heard the insults of being called dirty by my classmates once again. I recalled how I had to spend the rest of my time there alone because of the events that he set in motion. He listened patiently and promised that he would look into it and protect me if Henry ever came for me. But he did not understand that Henry was the one who run him over. He could do anything because he was not mentally stable. Either way, my husband promised to tightly secure the house and be on high alert. He, on the other hand, was okay. His arm was just slightly fractured, hairline, but he was able to go back to work in a couple weeks. It started with small things like someone calling my phone in the middle of the night and not saying a word. I blocked all private numbers, but this person would call me at work and just breathe on the phone. Everyone around me thought I was going crazy, and I ended up not telling them about the phone calls. Then there were times when stuff would go missing in the house, or I would hear footsteps at night. When my husband would check, he found nothing every single time. Then everything stopped for a while. Things got eerily quiet, just like before a storm. The storm came with me being summoned to my boss's office one day and being shown private emails that I sent to a colleague. They had somehow gotten into the boss's email, but I was amazed as to how, since I had used my personal email address. It was weeks of gossip between me and my workplace best friend. I mean, everyone has people whom they do not get along with at work, and it helps to gossip about them once in a while as long as no one finds out, right? I just did not bet on my boss getting a hold of those emails, especially when some of those emails were about him. He refused to let me know how the emails had gotten to his possession, but he gave both me and my best friend a verbal warning. This had Henry written all over it, but when I told my husband what happened, he laughed and told me not to gossip over emails. He said that maybe I left my computer unattended and someone logged into my email. I was very angry about the breach of my privacy, but I decided that I was going to brush it off as an incident. I kept on asking myself if maybe I was going crazy. I had been blaming Henry for it because I still did not make peace with the past. I called the institution where he was a few times to check on how he was doing, and they could confirm that he was under supervision. I stopped calling in the end because I was sure that I was sounding crazy, and they would probably end up admitting me there. But after the work email, things amped up. The most simple things would go missing in the house, and I would find them everywhere. I was certain that it was not my son because even though he was mischievous, there was no way he would be able to reach the top of the fridge. But the final straw that made me realize that I had to move away occurred several months later. I came home from work and made food for my child and let him sleep, and had a glass of wine for myself. My husband was working late, so I knew not to wait up for him, but I don't know when, I just suddenly fell asleep. I was knocked out for such a long time that I was surprised when I was woken up by crying. When I checked the time, I realized it's been several hours and I could not remember anything. When I went to my bedroom to check my child, I was met with a horrible sight. There was a bundle wrapped in white, and he was crying. When I say true fear struck me at the possibility of my child being hurt, I am not exaggerating. I approached the bundle with a deep dread, especially when I saw him covered in something red. It was only when I leaned in closer that I realized that it was red wine. Upon unwrapping him from the white bundle, I realized that it was my wedding dress. I instantly panicked and called my husband at that moment. I cried because of the relief that my child was okay, but also the fear that he was there. As I was calling him, I heard the door slam shut downstairs. I took my baby and ran downstairs, opened the door and saw a dark figure running out onto the street from my house. My husband was not picking up, so I took my child and hopped into my car, then drove across town to my parents. A lot of what happened after that was a blur, but Mom said that I could not stop screaming and saying that Henry was coming to kill me. I refused to leave my child alone or be left alone in a room. Simple things like a door closing were enough to cause another panic attack. I calmed down slightly when my husband arrived, but I told him that I was never going back home and that I wanted to leave town. He agreed, saying that my safety was important. He had been to the house and noticed that someone had indeed broken in. We both quit our jobs and made plans to move away. We did not tell any of our friends, and the only family that knew was Mom and Dad. We would only let people know where we were going when we officially moved out of the house. On the day that we were moving out, we got a moving crew and left our son at my parents' house. We were only going to take him once the house was empty and we were ready to go. There was a lot of stuff, so we moved the stuff until the middle of the night. My husband told me later on that while the movers were transporting the furniture, he got a call that there was a robbery in the neighborhood, and since he was the closest policeman, they needed his help. Note that this time he had already resigned, but somehow they begged him to go back and check what was going on. So he left me alone in the house without letting me know because he thought that it was just going to be a routine checkup, and then he would be back in a couple of minutes. What he did not know was that the call was a false alarm, and a way for me to be alone in the house without anyone else. I noticed that he was gone and I started calling him, but I found that my cell service suddenly disappeared. When I started to check all the phones in the house, I noticed then the back of their cords have been cut. So then I decided to leave and get to the neighbors for help. But all the doors were locked and I could not find the keys. That's when I started to feel the eerie feeling of dread. Seconds later, I started hearing footsteps and the sound of someone whistling in the house. I did not ask who it was because I did not want to notify them where I was. So I ran to our bedroom and tried to lock myself in, but there was no key. There was no more furniture left in the room except the chair, which I did put in front of the door. I waited, and I waited, until the footsteps grew louder by each step. All I could feel was fear and the feeling that I was not going to make it out alive. And then the door opened and I saw him for the first time in over a decade. He had been cold and menacing before, but that was nothing compared to the monster that stood in front of me. His hair was cut right to the skin. His face filled with scars, some healed, some fresh. And an evil sneer spread across his face that quickly turned into a smile when he saw me. I instantly started begging him to leave me alone and told him I was sorry for all the things and I didn't even know. There was nowhere to run. As my screams fell on deaf ears of the night, he assured me that no one would hear me. He told me that he had put a signal blocker on my property so that even if I called anyone, nobody would be here. Then he told me that by the time my husband realized that it's been a false alarm, he would be done with me. I begged him not to hurt me, telling him that I had a son to look after and a husband who needs me. He told me he would not kill me, but the fire would, and there would be no way for me to escape. That was when I saw the lighter in his hands, and I smelt the fuel. The realization was unlike anything I've ever felt before. Burning alive was his punishment for me. He used my biggest fear against me, and he knew that I feared a slow and painful death more than anything. He did not even stop me when I started pacing around the room, trying to figure out a way out. I believe that he knew there was no way out. We were on the second story of the house, and if I jumped, there was a chance, but I don't think I would have made it. He suddenly snapped and changed from being cold and calculating to being angry and explosive. He said that he's been trying to help people by selling those prescription drugs. He had been trying to help them escape from the demons in their minds, just like the drugs helped him escape. He says that he was helping the boy who killed to escape from his mind, and he did not kill him. He took the drugs on his own. Even though I had always been my father's favorite, I was just rotten and did not care for anyone else but myself. It was my fault that he was locked up for so many years. It was my fault that he was slowly going insane in his cage, while I was out there living my life. He had dreams that he wanted to achieve, and I've taken all that away from him. I owed him a lot, and he was there to take everything. He was screaming and waving the light around like a crazy person. The look in his eyes was one of pure rage and murder. As he wanted to skin me alive, to burn me right there and then. I've never seen such hate or malice in someone's eyes before. I was paralyzed, thinking that it was my last day on this earth. My life flashed before my eyes right there. I saw my parents, my friends, my husband, and finally my son. I thought of him growing up without truly knowing his mom. Him forgetting how I look like and how I sound. I just could not allow that to happen. I could not let this maniac in front of me take him away from me right now. I'd suffered because of him ever since we were children, and he would not let me go. He would not stop until he took everything away from me. So, when he closed the door behind himself and locked it, and I heard the sound of him whistling, knowing that he was going to ignite the flame at any second, I jumped. I jumped from that second-story floor, and I jumped to the ground. I heard the impact and should have felt pain, but the adrenaline was too much. I broke both ankles. I managed to run to my neighbor's house screaming, just as I heard my house going up in flames behind me. I managed to explain to them what happened, and they went to check if he was still there. They found him throwing a fit in front of the house. He seemed to have gone into shock and did not even notice that they were there. The police arrived soon enough and were able to whisk him away. When he saw me, he gained much more strength and tried to attack me, saying that I should have burned. That was truly one of the scariest experiences of my life. I was unable to sleep for days after that. The police were able to investigate and found that he had been missing from the place for ages, but the calls had been misdirected to his mother. It turns out that she's been visiting him for years, and I believe he managed to brainwash her. That was not the most shocking part, because I also found out that he's been sending vague threats to some people we went to school with, threatening to make them pay as well. The psychiatrist that he saw said he had a combination of bipolar, schizophrenia, and multiple personality disorders, and had been off his meds since he escaped. But they managed to send him back to where he came from under maximum security this time, while his mom was arrested for her part in helping him break out. Insurance paid for the parts of the house that were burned, and my husband and I moved to another state far away from it all. My parents promised to make sure that he would never come for me again, but I do live in a constant state of fear that he's just around the corner waiting to strike. It's not just his mental health. There's something within him that will most likely not rest until he tries to end me. I mean, that was what I believed until I started going to therapy. My husband ended up convincing me after I spent nights reliving the events of that night. It has been helping, and it's a work in progress. I've stopped jumping every single time the door closes, at least. But I wonder what went wrong with him. Was it my fault for always being the favorite child? I guess I'll never know. I was not kidding when I told you that this story's ending was absolutely bonkers. The fact that all this unfolded like this, and the fact that OP managed to escape with their life, is pretty crazy, considering the fact that they had a maniac after them. Guys, let me know your thoughts of this one and your thoughts on Henry. What do you think Henry's punishment should be? Should he still be in that maximum security mental prison? Or should something more sinister happen to him? Drop how you're feeling about that in the comment section down below, and we're going to look at the next story. Am I the a-hole for refusing to pay rent towards my boyfriend's mortgage if I move in with him? If you're not subscribed to the channel, take a second right now and click that subscribe button. It massively helps support the channel, and I thank you so much for the support. Here's story number 2. My boyfriend, who's 33 and I'm 29, have been dating for 3 years. He owns a house and lives there by himself. I live in an apartment by myself. We've talked about moving in together, as that's the logical next step, and we both want to do it. But I have some hang-ups related to moving into a house that I don't have any stake in. I'm refusing to pay any money that'll go directly towards his mortgage. I don't have any stakes in the house. Why would I contribute to his mortgage payment? I'm okay helping with utilities, groceries, household items, etc., but paying his mortgage is a hard no. I just don't think it makes any sense for me to pay towards his mortgage when I would get nothing from it if we ever broke up. His argument is that I would essentially be living with him for free, and it would cause an uneven dynamic in our payment towards shared living expenses. Which I kind of get. But at the same time, he's the one benefiting from paying down the mortgage and gaining equity, not me. He also argued that his mortgage is pretty much exactly what I was paying in rent. So by cutting that in half, I'm saving so much money on living cost compared to living on my own. Which, yeah, that's nice too, but legally, it's still not my house. I told him that the only way I would pay money for quote rent is if he signs a contract with me stating that any money I pay towards his mortgage will be paid back to me by him. In the event that we do break up, of course. It would also allow me to protect from eviction and other basic tenant rights. similar to a rental agreement. He's refusing to sign anything like that because, quote, in his words, I could break up with him for no reason and then take him to court for thousands. Which I suppose is true, but I wouldn't just break up with him. This whole situation is driving a wedge between us. He's mad at me for, quote, being so difficult, when all he thinks he's asking is that we split living expenses 50-50, if we are to live together. To me, it's not that simple. When he's the one that's owning the house that we live in, if I were on the title, it would be a totally different story. But he's not willing to put me on the title because he's lived there for 7 years already. My lease at my apartment is up in 2 months, and I know I need to make a decision sooner than later. It doesn't help that my landlord's going to be increasing my rent, and similar apartments in the area are going for even more than I'm paying. But I just don't feel right contributing money towards his mortgage. I also know that if I do renew my lease, it's pretty much a dagger to our relationship, which I don't want because I do love him and see a future with him. I just want to make sure I'm protected. Well, I can tell my boyfriend's patience is running thin, and he's upset with me for digging my heels in on this, but for me, this is about protecting myself for the worst case scenario, while he's not really risking anything. So guys, I don't know how you really feel about this, but my opinion is, I think it's kinda weird. OP doesn't really seem to care about paying her rent to her landlord's mortgage, but she won't do it for her boyfriend's? I don't know, she's saving money in the long run, and this little stake thing is so weird because she's just renting. Let me know your thoughts on this though, guys. I know there's probably more to it, but drop it down below and let's talk about this. Because man, this is an interesting story. Thank you so much for tuning in today, guys. I love doing this. You can find us here every single day at Mr. Reddito. I hope you have an amazing day and I'll see you tomorrow.